Hello and welcome to another episode of LGOtv Big Talk. And why Big Talk? Because I hate small talk. My guest today is a big talker and he's a big person. He has a book called 10 Feet Tall that if you have not read, you've got to pick up. He is 21 years old. He's a renowned speaker, a Gen Z activist, and the author of this incredible book. He inspires millions of people across the globe with his universal message of living life on your own terms and building the framework for self-acceptance. He was diagnosed at the age of 2 with a rare form of dwarfism. It's called metatropic dysplasia. And in fact, I think I heard him on stage saying that there are like 100 people in the entire country who have it. So when he says rare, he means rare. And he turned this life of suffering, isolation, victimhood into one of empowerment, impact, and influence. And he teaches his audiences to do the same. After a severe battle with cyberbullying in high school, he decided to share his story to offer both hope and to enact change. He was the driving force behind not just one, but 2 pieces of legislation that were signed into law in Virginia, one on bullying prevention and the other requiring empathy and emotional intelligence to be taught in K through 12 classrooms across the state. I would like for him to take this nationally and get it in every state. Whether he's sharing his message with thousands of students at a time, empowering readers with his book 10 Feet Tall, or working with Fortune 100 companies like Facebook, HP, Marriott, Brandon consistently delivers tools to audiences of all ages to shatter their limiting beliefs, elevate their mindset, and create an amplified life. And that's what he's going to do with us today. Brandon, welcome to Big Talk.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura. I'm so excited for our conversation.
So you and I met on this little app called Clubhouse. I had heard of you before and I'd seen you on, I think we share some speaker bureaus and I'd sort of seen your story. And then when I saw you and I heard your voice and I heard you speak, I was like, gosh, this guy doesn't just talk about this stuff. Like I could hear it in your voice. Like the thing about Clubhouse is that you don't see people talking, but you can hear them. And
Yeah.
the authenticity and the integrity and the power with which you spoke was so immediately compelling. I started to just go into every room you were in because I just wanted to hear what you had to say.
I appreciate that so much. Thank you. And ditto. I'm so grateful that Clubhouse connected us. And it really gives us this level of intimacy that I don't think any other social platform does, just because it is audio and you can't fake it in the same way that you're able to edit and script and polish every other content type. So it's been quite an amazing few months of being on there.
So that's a really interesting segue into your story because so many of us edit and script and polish, but you can't exactly hide.
Yeah.
Let's go back to that day in the airport. You're going through the airport, you're on your little yellow Segway scooter, and you meet a woman who changes your life.
Yeah. So to give a little bit of imagery to this little segue, it was basically a combination of a Transformer and a Lamborghini, like very badass looking thing. So it drew a ton of attention. And that was the mobility device that I rode instead of a wheelchair or a motorized scooter, because I still have the use of my legs. I just can't walk long distances. So a woman came up to me in line at TSA at the airport and started asking me all these questions about my Segway and then about me, my condition, what my hobbies are, what my passions are. She was just really intrigued. And like I said, I'd kind of been used to this, just people coming up to me and asking me all these questions. But it got to the point where it was like almost a little too excessive. So
Yes.
after a little 3 to 5 minute exchange in line, we kind of said our separate ways. And I went to the gate. I thought she went to hers, but maybe 2 minutes later, she ended up sitting next to my family and I at the gate because she was also going down to Fort Lauderdale.
You're like, or at least I hope she was.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's getting weird.
That would have been quite interesting if not. So what happened was we ended up talking for another 45 minutes, and I told her more about my story and just myself in general, and she told me about what she does. And in one of the first sentences that she said to me, what she did was that she was one of the original organizers of the TEDx conferences. And when I heard that, I immediately lit up because my mom and I would watch TED Talks almost every day after school. And I said to her, to my mom, how cool would it be one day to share my story on that stage? But never envisioning that that opportunity would kind of land in my lap the way that it did. And so from meeting this woman in the airport who ended up being Haley Foster, one of the greatest TEDx and just speaker coaches in general, she got me in the door of a TEDx event in my hometown of Richmond, Virginia. And that was the start of the rest of my life. It was literally that talk that was only 6 minutes long in front of about 2,000 people, where I shared my story and I was real for the first time. And that showed me my purpose and my why in life. And I've been following that ever since. And I'm truly lucky that at 15, I was able to discover that huge gift.
So had you, as you were growing up, well, at what point in your childhood did you realize that you were different from other kids?
So I remember distinctly looking in the mirror when I was 4 years old and saying to my mom, "Why are my legs so different looking?" And she said to me, "Well, you have special bones and they grow in a way that the other kids don't, and that's okay. You are amazing the way that you are," or something along those lines. And I think was the first time that I had this imagery of being unlike the kids around me, but it
Mhm.
didn't become too distinct until I would say maybe 9 or 10 years old, when the height difference, as all the other kids would grow inches taller than me every year, and I would, of course, stay the same size of 3'9", which is about the height of an 8-year-old. And so that's when I would say the teasing and the exclusion started, and I really noticed the public's reaction from me, the staring and the pointing, and it reached a point when I was 11 years old that I just had no sense of self in terms of seeing the reason why I was different. I thought all of it was bad, all of it was negative, and it was just adding fuel to the fire for people to bully me, to tease me, to not invite me to be their friend or whatever it was. And it reached quite literally a boiling point when I was coming home from school one day. It was either the end of 5th grade or 6th grade, 11 or 12 years old. And I said to my mom, "I can't do this anymore. I'm in so much pain, both physically and emotionally. I have nobody, and there's no reason for me to live. I'm going to go kill
Mm.
myself." And that was me, of course, desperately reaching out for help, not wanting to die, but so desperately wanting the pain and suffering to end, but not knowing if or how that could ever be. And so I was quite literally moments away from wrapping a belt around my neck and going through with that before my mom physically restrained me and held me in her arms for a good 15 minutes, just holding me, telling me how loved I was. And it was that point that I reached the help that I needed. She got me counseling the very next day. And it was through therapy and finding, it was 5 or 6 different counselors that I had to go through in
Yeah.
order to find one that not only I felt comfortable with, but I also felt seen and heard by, which was huge. And that was just a incredibly pivotal moment, I think, for my entire existence, not only to reach one of the lowest and most painful points, but also to see that it gets so much better.
So you said a couple things there that I want to touch back on. I mean, you said a lot of things I want to touch back on, but two in particular. I want to talk about the difference between being different and being special, and I want to talk about the difference between being loved and being seen, because I
Mm,
think that those are two things that you highlighted. I mean, I think we all want to be special, right? But
yeah,
nobody wants to be quote unquote different, because when
right,
you're different, it's like that's where the exclusion starts.
yeah.
How do you go? Is it was it when you finally felt seen, right? Not just loved, but seen, loved for who you are? Was that the difference between understanding that what made you different made you special, or what was the journey like to get there?
So to be quite real with you, I didn't accept the fact that I was special until I was able to accept myself, which was much later on
Right.
and even more recently in my teenage years. And so I think it was that process of not only self-acceptance, but this huge piece of self-love, which I'm still trying to work on every day, that is reaffirming to me that every part of who I am, whether it's different, it's one of a kind, it's whatever, it's who I am, and that's me.
Hmm.
And I have the ability to either love that person fully and wholly and go forward like being a beam of light with that person, or I could not step into that sense of self and I could play small and I could hide, because when you're living in a world that isn't built for somebody like yourself,
Right.
it's kind of training you to do that. And you have to work really, really hard to go against the grain and to be seen and to be seen loudly in the way that I've tried to do. And I think that's what it's all about. Parents or whoever it is in our environment empowering us enough to be able to see these gifts within ourselves. But sometimes it takes us ourselves to unlock it and recognize who we actually are and the potential that lies inside.
Yeah, I interviewed Mark Metry, who I know you also know,
Absolutely. He's a
on
good friend
this.
of mine.
Yeah, he's fantastic. And I interviewed him about 6 weeks ago, and we talked about his own suicidal ideation, his own struggle with depression, and we talked about the reflected self, right? And so
Yeah.
it's like you're not who you think you are, and you're not who others think you are. You're who you think others think you
Yes.
are. And when he explained that to me, I was like, it like warped my brain a little bit. And I was like, oh, it's so true, right? Like we think we are as good as other people, we assume other people think we are. So if you're already starting from this place of feeling different and not feeling special and
Yeah.
feeling excluded and being in emotional and physical pain, it's not a big leap to get to that place of feeling like you should get smaller. And
Right.
and then I read this great article in a Harvard Business Review where these two Black women researchers were saying that it's not imposter syndrome, right? We don't have like there's not like that's a diagnosis that tells us something wrong with us, but really it's that the world was created for cisgendered straight white males of a certain size, of
Yes.
a certain look, of a certain heritage, a
Absolutely.
certain whatever, and any of the rest of us who don't look like that, of course we're imposters. Right? So it's not that
Yeah.
there's something wrong with us, it's that there's something wrong with the systems. um
So
but
true.
so what so I'm very interested in this dichotomy between the like early self-loathing and the
Yeah.
later self-acceptance, and now making a living where you can't have a conversation about anything other than your size. Like do you ever just want to be like Brandon and not Brandon, the speaker who talks about self-acceptance because he has this rare disease, Brandon?
Yeah.
I mean
That's a great question, and I think that's the dichotomy of being a 21-year-old or just being so young. I've been doing this for the last 6 years
yeah.
and having the platform that I do and the expectations that come with it. In a lot of ways, I'm incredibly blessed that those expectations, I feel like, are on my shoulders every day
Which
because
makes it hard to complain.
yes, yes, absolutely.
And yet
Right. The flip side of it, it's definitely the pressure is overwhelming. And it's been overwhelming since day one because I'm still trying to step into this sense of who am I? What do I really want for the rest of my life? Because understanding that it's changing on a pretty rapid basis.
yes.
I'm young and the vision that I have of myself has changed probably every 6 months, every year
Sure.
at least, and all of those just parts of my identity which shape what I'm going to do with my life. And so that has definitely been just a driving force, listening to that inner gut, that inner voice, trying to have that be my compass, but also knowing that I'm gonna F up and I'm gonna fall on my face and I'm not gonna get it right every project that I do or every partner that I align with or every friend that I try and make,
Mhm.
because that's what life is. And just being as open to the journey as possible, but also knowing that it comes with a huge sense of responsibility for my own mental health, my own self-care, my own boundaries. Because if I don't take care of me, how the hell can I show up for the 300,000 people that follow me every day and
Yes.
that I'm constantly speaking to, and whatever it might be. And again, like that's where the pressure and the expectations are good, and they're fueling me to continue showing up for this mission that is so much bigger than myself. But it's also, it doesn't make it easier on the days that it is a ton of overwhelming pressure, and I have to take a step back and do absolutely no work, respond to no emails, which could be a bad thing long term if I'm not able to have like a balance, have people to step in for me when I'm not able to do that. And again, I'm still finding all of that out. It's been very much me trying to do all of these different things, wear all these hats, which is good. You know, I've picked up a ton of different skills, but it is quite an interesting process. Let's just say that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think as soon as you hit your stride and then it's like, boom, pandemic. Now you're the camera guy and the sound guy and the lighting guy and
Yeah,
right?
all of those things. Yep.
I mean, there are a lot of skills I picked up this year that I would like to give back. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Trade those in. Yes, please.
I'd like to trade those in. Absolutely. So, I mean, I think it's so interesting. When my book Limitless came out 2 years ago, I did like 150 podcasts and media and, as
Wow.
part of the tour.
Yep.
And one of the dumbest questions I kept getting asked was, "What would you tell your 21-year-old self?" And I was like, "My 21-year-old self who's listening to a podcast that was recorded over the internet and I'm hearing it on my cell phone." Like, none of those things existed when I was 21 years old. So even if I did know myself and be able to give myself advice, the whole world changes so rapidly.
Yeah,
So you're changing. I mean, like, you're still growing your full frontal lobe. Like, your brain is literally still developing,
right.
and you have 300,000 people to be responsible for. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of pressure on somebody who's still on that journey and trying to figure it out. And my as you know, the book that I'm writing is going to be called Wonder Hell, and I'm doing these interviews as research for it. And it's all about that moment of wonder when you're like, "Holy shit!" Like, people are listening to me, they're reading me, they're following me,
Yep.
they're like, "This is incredible! It's humbling! It's wonderful!" And also, I've never been so exhausted and stressed and full of anxiety and uncertainty in my
For
entire
sure.
life. It's kind of hell, but wonder hell is that moment where the burden of your potential walks in and is like, "Hey, Brandon, what you got for me? Are you going to live into this newfound potential that you didn't even realize last week, last month, last year existed? Or
Yeah.
are you going to let it pass you by?" And in the book, I want to write about people like you who have had these moments, because there's not just one, there's many. And everything I read talks about how to survive these moments. But I
Mhm.
think on the other side of this wonder hell is what? The next one and the next one and the next one, if we're lucky, like we keep pushing our boundaries and we keep learning what we're made of.
Yeah.
So on the other side of this wonder hell is the next one. So I don't want to just survive it. I want to thrive it. I want to look forward to them.
100%.
And you are in this moment of wonder hell, I would think, right? Where I mean, we're all constantly in it, where you've now signed with, this big talent agency. You're like, you are on the precipice of the next iteration of yourself.
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit about the talent agency thing and what the next iteration is going to look like. And then I want to talk a little bit about just how you're going to handle it.
Yeah, so it's all happened in the last few months, which is really cool. All
It's
of
been so
these
fun to
exciting
watch.
updates. Thank you. It's been fun to experience, but I do have to say a ton of ups and downs, like
Hmm.
the roller coaster of emotions, um, to the extreme. But I would say it's a result of, again, being open, putting myself out there, and being raw, being transparent, not with overly sharing and being like too vulnerable, or
Hmm.
putting too much of myself out there. But I think sharing myself, sharing my story has been wildly important, not only for the advancement of what I've done, but to show people that they aren't alone in what they're going through. You don't need to be
Yes.
3'9" to relate to feeling invisible or alone or unlovable or whatever it might
Hmm.
be.
Hmm.
And so a Clubhouse actually is how all of I would say most all of these advancements kind of came about.
Amazing.
So it started with a producer who contacted me, and he's worked on a ton of huge shows that you would recognize on all the big networks, ABC, NBC, Fox. And he just basically said, I really love your story, and I'd love to have a conversation just introducing one another. And so we did. And he said, I think it'd be really cool if we could explore some sort of show concept. And so that started a conversation to a bigger project with maybe something that will come in the works in terms of an unscripted show. But that also introduced me to his agency,
Mm,
which is an agency that I've been looking to get in with for the last like almost 2 years now. And it's been like literally on my vision board. I will sign with, and I listed 4 agencies that have been like big goal.
yeah.
And this was the thing that helped make that happen. And so we started talking about this show, and then they basically realized that I'm doing all these different projects and multi-hyphenate and blah, blah, blah. And they could work with me to develop all these different things. And so they introduced me to bunch of their different departments because they are 360, like full coverage. They have
Yeah.
literary, touring, digital, podcast. And so I met with all their different departments. And I'm just really excited to put myself out there in ways that I haven't before. So whether that's TV or new partnerships or whatever the other added visibility is, because at the end of the day, representation matters so much in terms of who we see in front of us on screen or on social media. Again, we don't need to necessarily relate exactly to what that person is going through to feel their emotions or to have that sense of empathy, which, as you know, is such a vital component to my mission. And so that has been just such a added blessing, I think, in all of this, that yeah, the travel stopped, meeting amazing people stopped, without going to events. And that's been really hard during this pandemic. But the new doors that have opened are just blowing my mind still to think about. And I would never have walked through them in the same way if things were normal and not happening in the way that they have been in the last few months. So that's been really cool to see kind of what is on the horizon. And I'm very excited for what's to come.
Yeah, I mean, and I would even go further and say that none of these things would happen if you hadn't yourself walked the path towards self-acceptance, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's very easy to disappear in a world that wants you to disappear, right? That's the easy way
Yeah.
out. You are not taking the easy way out at all. And in fact, to sign with an agency and think about developing these projects into shows and putting yourself out there even more, the raft of bullying that's going to come, the raft of just online harassment that's going to come. How are you preparing yourself for? I mean, there's going to be lots of cheering. Obviously, there's
Yeah.
going to be lots of love, but I don't know about you, but I don't remember the 100 5-star reviews my book got. I remember word for
Right.
word the one-star review, right? Like those
Absolutely.
things they stick. They're like a cancer and they just erode us from the inside.
You're
How
so
are you
right.
preparing yourself for that?
It's a great question. And it's something that, again, I'm still very actively working on that muscle and that sense to not necessarily let things roll off because we're all human beings. And I don't think we could expect ourselves to be robotic and not be affected by something really hurtful or deep down that affects us, but not letting that define us, not letting that
Mm,
control what we do or our output or even who we show up as. That's been huge for me. And you're so right that the more visibility, the more followers, the more attention, the more negativity and the more love and the more, but yes, the more negativity for sure. And especially when you're somebody like me. And just like you said before, you can't hide the fact that you look the way that you do. I can't try and blend in the fact that I'm the size of an 8-year-old living
yeah.
in this world at 21. And I just try to understand that it's not me. It's hurt people hurt people. And if I could implore this sense of empathy towards that, and knowing that I was also on the flip side of it when I was younger and going through the really, really hard years with depression and just hating myself, I was an angry freaking kid
Yeah.
and I was an
Yeah.
asshole. And I
Yeah.
treated people the same way that they treated me or worse. Like if
Yes.
I perceived them looking at me in the wrong way, I would flip out because I felt attacked and I thought that was my way of like, standing up for myself and being this tough guy that didn't let shit affect him.
Yeah.
Well, that was
Yeah.
wrong. And that was like the total wrong way to do it because people if that's how you fight fire with a fire and more gasoline, then no progress is ever going to be made with extinguishing it. And I'm not saying like we have to be overly nice and like fake to these people that are treating us like garbage, but just understanding that like there has to be a reasoning why they're in that much pain that they have to try and mirror that onto you.
Yeah, I can honestly say that I was twice your age when I figured that out. I literally was in my 40s when I got to that point where I was like, "Wait a minute. This isn't about me. It's about them and how they feel and their reflection of whatever I'm doing that's causing some sort of insecurity or self-loathing
Right.
or jealousy or whatever, right? I was in my 40s when I got to that point. And I mean, I would imagine just you standing tall and walking confidently down the street is an act of um, rebellion and
Yeah.
a radical act for a lot of people who don't feel
Right.
that way themselves and are like, well, how can he do it when I can't even do it? And I'm, whatever, typically developing or whatever the
Yeah.
the phrase is. I mean, I developed, I was very sarcastic. I had one of those very tough outer skins because I was afraid if
Yeah.
I let anybody see me, if I showed them the soft underbelly, they'd stab, So I was like, a
Right.
good offense is a good defense. And that was my, that was what I did. But hurt people do hurt people. And what's that? There's that Buddhist expression, like holding anger is like drinking poison, expecting your enemy to die. Or it's like, it's so exhausting to live in that place where you're constantly like have like the shields up, you're like
Well,
you're
because it's
waiting for
it's a
mortar
constant
fire.
state of fight or flight. It's like,
Yes.
when's the next thing gonna come my way that I have to respond to, that I have to be, like, triggered by in such
Yes.
an extreme way that I have to act like somebody that I'm not, and that's where it's so exhausting, both emotionally, spiritually, and physically, because you're having to show up as somebody that you're just totally not, and nobody wants that.
Right, right. And yet, as we said earlier, what percentage of your conversations have to do with your physical being?
Yeah, quite a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that Clubhouse in some way was also sort of relieving because it wasn't. I mean, it's in your bio, right? Your whole story is in your bio and it's part of who you are, but it, I wonder if in some ways it was sort of nice to have just audio only for a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, and the thing is, it was so much more than just my size, because
Mhm.
I to people on Clubhouse that weren't necessarily familiar with my story or background or whatever, if they hadn't heard the fact that I have this disability or I'm 3'9" or whatever it is, they wouldn't know. Like they literally would never know. And so it's almost like a sense of normalcy in a way that I've never experienced, where obviously in person or not necessarily on Zoom because you can't really tell, or on camera, I should say, that I'm this size sitting down. Um, but where I just didn't have to deal with people asking me all these questions or
Mhm.
having expectations or thoughts in their head about what I'm capable of or who I am or any of those things, which were total bullshit at the end of
Right,
the day.
right, right.
Um, it was relieving. It really was.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed in your bio, it's 21-year-old world changer, motivational speaker and Gen Z activist, author, impact-driven entrepreneur, all these things. And then later in your bio, it's like 3'9", right? So it's not like you hide something, but I love that it's not what you lead with. I know so many people
Right.
who the thing they lead with is so much less a part of who they am. or who they are.
Yeah.
um, English tough this morning. But you know, I think that that's incredible. But you're still at this point where there is this realization that in order to get to the place where you can impact the most number of people, you have to lead with the disability, because that's the thing that makes you different, right? That's the thing that makes you special. And so the it's I'm fascinated by this understanding. I have an executive coaching client who's from North Dakota, and she called me up and she's like, I want to shake off North Dakota. I don't want anyone to know I'm small town, small state, fly over, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, but what if you embraced it? Right. And what if that became the thing, because it's so different from everybody else?
Yeah.
What if that was the thing that you used? And it was really interesting to see, as soon as she changed from I want to shake the North Dakota off me, to I want to talk about this as what did I learn from these hard scrabble roots of,
Right.
these winters, everything changed. It's an
Yeah.
interesting thing to think about, this sort of self-acceptance. So you got there through a lot of therapy, a lot of just growing older, seeing what opportunities came. But are there, like, do you have certain practices that you use on a daily basis? Is it the people you surround yourself with? Is it just knowing that this is the thing that will lead you to the impact you want? How does it look on a day? How does it look in reality?
So I would say for me, the biggest non-negotiable would be who I'm. Sorry, my thing just popped up. Okay, there we go. The non-negotiable is who I'm surrounding myself with. And I'm somebody that gets so greatly affected by the energy of other people. So if
Yes.
I'm with somebody, I mean, even on FaceTime for an hour, if I'm talking to somebody that isn't the right vibe, and I'm not trying to sound all like Gen Z here, but in terms of like the energy that is, I don't know, uh, fulfilling and energizing and positive and loving and all of that. I'm not saying every person that we hang around needs to be that way, but I am saying if they are draining in every sense of the word, then they probably aren't somebody that you should be investing your time and energy towards. And
Yes.
so that has been, I would say, the biggest learning lesson for me over the last 2 or 3 years of investing myself into people and opportunities that were doing nothing for me, or having no sense of return. It was totally one way. And that is, it kind of leads you to a brick wall almost. And so I would say that's my like number one, no matter what. It's like if somebody is asking for my time and I know they don't like mesh well with me, in terms of their energy and just what their vision is, it's totally okay. I have no judgment towards them as a person. I just am going to choose to not go out to lunch or not spend an hour and a half on a phone call with that person constantly complaining or talking about how much they hate everyone or whatever it might be.
Yes, yes. I find those people to be so draining too. The ones where they can only talk about other people. They don't talk about ideas, or every time you say anything, the response is, "Well, for me," right? Or it's like immediately
Right.
turns it back to them, and you're just like, "Okay, well, I didn't realize
It's
that
too
this
much.
was." It's too much. It's too much. So, but it's also heartbreaking, right? Because I've observed you enough on Clubhouse to know that you're like a show up kind of person. Like you show up for people and you show up hard for them. And it's heartbreaking when you do that and then somebody is just selfish or narcissistic, or because they hurt other people. Like
Right.
when they don't show up back. It's hard. And I would imagine that now, as things are starting to really build for you, more people are starting to hang out, right? More people are starting to hang around. And so do you have like a self-protection mechanism in place, or are you like me, somebody who just falls in love with somebody every day and you're just like, I'm going to get my heart broken by people who don't show up back, but that's the price I pay for getting to meet the people who will.
Yeah, I think there's some of both in there. I love being around people, but being around the right people. Like
Yes.
that's the huge caveat for me.
Right, like, I always say to people, like,
And
"I'm not an introvert, I'm just choosy." I'm just selective,
yes,
but I am an
absolutely.
introvert.
I mean,
Yeah, I'm super choosy.
it's like so fundamentally important to know that about ourselves. Like when we're able to be the most us around the
Mhm,
people that we're comfortable with, like,
mhm.
that's a huge gift. And so for me, it's oh shoot, I'm doing that thing that we just said we hate with the
No, but
with
this
the
is your
answers.
interview, it's all
Um,
about you, you should be saying that.
okay, so yeah, I have a pass with that one for now.
That
So
just shows your
for
emotional intelligence, though, that even on an interview about you, you were thinking about that.
um, so I think it's a result of this shit that I've been through in terms of
Yeah,
both the bullying and being burned by friends that used me or treated me like absolute garbage or whatever it
yeah.
was. I think it's led me to have a natural wall up where I have this protection mechanism just inherently with anybody that comes my way now. And that could be perceived as being closed off or being cold. But it's just like you said, it's being choosy who we are selecting to give our space to. And that's not something that everybody is going to get access to. Like just flat out point blank, if we have this sense of self-love and even self-worth for who we are and what we do, we're not going to let people walk all over us. We're not going to let these boundaries continuously get hurt and broken and all of these things because people are choosing to be selfish. That's where we need to get out of our own way and recognize that these people are detracting from everything that we're doing, even if we don't recognize that. And so I would rather have maybe 3 or 4 close friends than a huge group that I'm not very close to. I've never really had a friend group. I've had a person here, a person there. I'm so blessed to have an incredible network of friends, but it's always been tough in terms of be like when I was growing up, I didn't get invited to birthday parties as often as the other kids would or
Right.
out for plans or whatever it was. And that was really devastating in every sense of the way. It was devastating. And so I had to learn that it was up to me to put myself out there. It was up to me to make the first move, to say hi, to break the ice, because I can't expect other people to do that, especially when you don't necessarily know how to interact with somebody that is different than you are in terms of never coming across somebody like me. I'm
Mhm.
very actively aware that there aren't too many folks with dwarfism living in the world. I think there's maybe 30,000, but that's not that many compared to the 7 or 8 billion people that live all across the globe. So I I want to use that as a way to show people you don't need to be scared. You don't need to be apprehensive. There's nothing to be worried about with somebody that's a little bit smaller than you. I'm not contagious,
Right.
um, and I'm a pretty cool guy if you just give me a chance to talk to you.
And yet that still puts the burden on you. Which is that
Yes,
that means that you have to figure out constantly how to refill your well and how to have energy and how to bring it
right,
all the time, and it's
correct.
it's you putting yourself out there for constant rejection, and
Yeah,
that's, as somebody who, is deeply introverted and was, I would say I wasn't unpopular in high school, but I was, like, just popular enough, like, among, like, the small selective, like, nerdy, honors class kids,
right.
but my sister was just a year ahead of me in school, and she was one of those kids who came out of the womb beautiful and never had an awkward period, like, she's just, like, still to this day, absolutely gorgeous. All of my guy friends had crushes on her, so, like,
Mm,
none of them had crushes on me, so I had this, like, constant feeling of rejection, and it seeded
yeah,
this insecurity that even though I have an exceptionally, from the outside, quote unquote, successful life, it still exists and it's still hard. And I
Totally.
can't imagine having to go to the well every single day and think about the possibility of rejection over and over and over and over. And I mean, it's the level of self-care you must have to do to refill your energy every day is probably quite astounding.
And to be honest, I think a lot of it is unconscious. Like I'm not even aware what
Because
I'm
it's always
doing.
been that way.
Right. But because if it's not that way, the consequences would be so dire in terms of me not having any light to give. And even for myself, just being so depleted from everybody else. And I never want to reach that point again.
Is so it's so I'm so interested in this thing because the very thing that will be the thing that helps you change the world is the thing that you have to continue to deal with and work with and figure out.
Yeah.
So how do you teach other people to have empathy?
That's the $1,000,000 question. I think it is about being a model and showing especially kids that you don't need to be a superhero, you don't need to be this mythological figure in order to be there and in order to show up and be somebody that is more than saying, I'm sorry that you're going through that, but then walking away. It's
Right.
standing next to that person saying, I'm here for you, and putting your arm around that person instead of just like looking at them from the other side of the road saying, oh, sorry, that sucks that you're going through that shit, but I'm over here and I'm fine. But empathy is really that ability to stand with that person and know that they have the emotional support that they need in that moment, whether they are going through something devastating and really heartbreaking or something that's just a minor bump in the road. But having the ability to just be that person to show up is huge. And especially when we're in that moment of being vulnerable, being down, being broken in whatever way, to have that is everything. And so for me, it's knowing that kids are they're the most needed in terms of ones who we need to put a lot of emphasis towards showing what empathy really is. It's hard to explain. It's really hard to like put
Yeah.
a parameter on it. But if we decide to have an ounce of empathy for the people around us as much as we can, then that rubs off on the young people in our life. It really does.
Yeah, what's that quote that there's a it's easier to build better children than to fix broken adults?
100%.
Yeah, yeah. And I like this idea of just of going in. The way that you talk about empathy is so interesting. And the TEDx that I gave, I talked about the problem with the question, how can I help? Because
Mhm.
how can I help is all about centering me. How can
Right.
I be the hero of your story, right? How can I do it? And the better question is what needs to happen? Like, what do you need? What does support look like? What would success look like for
Yes.
you? And then figuring out from there, what do I have, whether it's something I can give or a connection I can make or
Totally.
something, but
Yeah.
centering you. And the way that you talk about empathy really centers the person in need
Yeah.
versus when we talk about empathy, often it's like, well, if you can be more empathetic to the person in need, it's like, no, like it's not about you being the hero. It's about
Right.
centering the person who has need and making sure that they get what they need. So it's not about you at the end of the day. And I think, there's something to the American way, the like rigid, rugged individualism and rigid independence and all of
Yeah.
this stuff, and how we think that we're the hero of every story. And then you look back in history, and it turns out,
Totally.
well, we killed all those people, we gave all those people
Mhm.
smallpox, we stole all their land, we put those
Right.
people in chains, right? Like we're not exactly the hero of a
Not
lot
at
of
all.
stories, it turns
Yeah.
out.
And it's like it's so important to have that humility to
Yes.
to recognize that we aren't gonna get it right 100% of the time, and especially to the parents out there, you have to understand that it's okay to not be the perfect mom or the perfect dad and to mess up and to show your kids that you're a human being and that you're not a robot, like I mentioned before, and that you do have bad days, just like we have bad days. That's what empathy is.
Yes, yes, and you said something I thought was so you just passed right by it quickly, but it was so profound when you said whether it's a big thing they're going through or just a small bump in the road. Because the big thing they're going through or the small bump in the road maybe our interpretation of it, right? But like when I was
Yes.
when I was a young parent, I was talking to a parent of kids who are now, my kids' age, and I was like, "How do you do it? You have such a great relationship with them. Clearly, you must have done something right, or at least you didn't do things actively wrong. What did you do?" And I remember the mom saying to me, "I just never stopped listening." Because when you stop listening, they
Mm,
stop talking, and you have to listen to the big stuff
yes.
and the
I love
small
that.
stuff. And by the way, it's all big stuff to them. And I was like, "Oh,
That's
that's
huge. Yes.
huge," right? Because when you're going through something, the pain is exquisite and it's immediate and it is
Right.
local, and it doesn't matter if it's small or it's large,
You're so right.
it still hurts.
Well, and especially like thinking about to those that are listening, when you were a teenager, when you were in your younger years and had a minor thing happen, whether that's getting a D on a quiz or a boyfriend or girlfriend breaking up with you, or like that little thing that you thought was your entire freaking world, like that is it. And I think that is such an important point that you just addressed, that we may think it is what like some level of intensity to what they're actually going through, but we're never going to know what it's like to be in their shoes, and that's why it's so important to not try and like be that person's hero, but to see what we can do with what we have, to be able to support them, and we don't need to center it around us. But then the other piece that I just wanted to mention with empathy that I'm constantly sharing is, this mission that I have to elevate empathy. I think it starts and stops with us. I don't think it's
Yes.
about us. But if we don't have empathy towards ourselves, first and foremost, then
Yes.
like literally, how are we supposed to be a caring, supportive, non-selfish, like all those things person to who we need to show up as or for? And I think that's just a wildly important thing to remember, that yes, we could treat people with as much empathy as like is humanly possible. But if we don't have that for ourselves, does it do anything? Like, does that empathy that we're putting out there actually make a real difference? I don't
No,
think so.
because it's not real. It's not real, and
Correct.
I think
Correct.
that's why Clubhouse has been so pivotal in your career, because people could hear that it's real, that your self-acceptance, that your self-love, your self-celebration, right? Like, those are 3 totally different things, right?
Right.
There's, like, self-loathing, and then there's self-acceptance, but then there's, like, the self-love and the
Yeah.
self-celebration, and you getting on stage at 3'9" with self-love in your heart and in your message is such a radical act that I think people see you and they say, "Well, if he can do it, w what's stopping me?" Right? Like, if he's there and he's come through this fire, I think I can too. He's showing me the way.
Yes.
He's the role model, he's leading, he's just by existing in the way that you exist, you lead in this way that is so inspiring to other people that it allows you um it's like it's almost like, if you're in a dark forest, you need a light, you need a beacon, you need a roadmap, and just to have somebody show you what the next first step is, I think is
Yeah.
such a useful it's such a useful thing to have, because you don't sometimes we don't even realize that we're lost until we see somebody who knows the way.
So true.
And
So true. And then like the other thing is, we again don't need to necessarily know what it's like to be in that exact person's shoes.
right,
But
because we
we
can't.
exactly. Never. But there are parts of everybody's story that we could each relate to, and like that's what it means to be a human being. That's what at the end of the day, we're gonna have our differences, in terms of what we believe, who we believe in, politics, religion, like all those things. We don't need to see completely eye to eye, same to same vision. But if we could understand that we are having similar needs and desires and wants and emotions as human beings, then I think it puts us on an even playing field to understand that, like, yes, we don't have an even playing field in terms of
Yeah.
privilege and hierarchies and whatever, But if we could understand that as human beings, we have so much more in common than we do that separates us. And I think that's the future of humanity, embracing that and hopefully having a more empathetic, understanding, loving, more tolerable world. Like that's where it comes from.
Yeah, that is so huge. It's so huge. I have recently gotten very frustrated with people like, well, I accept gay people and I accept trans people and I accept black people, whatever. Like, it's like, they don't want your accept. Like, oh, good for you. You accept them. Like,
Right.
like that's so offensive. Like, it's just so like, yay, give
Right.
yourself a little woke pat on the back. I mean, it's
Right.
just so offensive.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's a whole other, we could do a whole other show about that. What I think is interesting is this idea that we think that we have to have all the answers. Like, people come to us, we're on stage, we're writing books, we're speaking, and we
Right.
should have all the answers. And what I've come to learn recently is that people don't actually want answers. They don't want to be shown the way out of the dark forest at first. What they really just want is to go, oh God, that that must really suck. I'm sorry you're going through that.
Okay.
Like, it's almost like they need to be seen and validated
Yes.
before it's like, okay, well, when you're ready for solutions, we can maybe bat some around and throw some against the wall. What do you think? Right. But like, it's it almost like this idea of empowerment. And I know that you've spoken about this. This idea of empowerment means like, I will empower you, I will give you the solution, but really it's helping people find their own personal power. I think is the
Exactly.
greatest empathy you can have, is to see somebody and recognize them and let them be in their space and let them
Yeah.
be in their pain, but be there, like, keep them company in their misery more
Hmm.
than, solving their problem.
And I think that's the difference between inspiration and empowerment, because when
Yes.
we are able to empower somebody, we literally give them their own abilities, like right
Yes.
in front of them.
Yes.
But then when we inspire them, that's fleeting. I don't, I used to think that was my goal, to want to
Yes.
inspire people. And I would get like super pumped up whenever somebody would tell me, either after a speech or in an email, in a DM, whatever it might be, you're such an inspiration to me. Until I realized, like, that's not doing anything. Like, when we're inspiring somebody, that might be good for a short amount of time.
But it's also further othering you,
Correct.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
so in the
Yeah.
end, it was like they felt great for a few minutes, but on your back.
Right. I exactly, and that's like the level of tokenization that
Yes.
I still very much feel in this line of work. And I'm trying to very actively push against that, both in terms of being somebody with a disability, a Gen Zer, a queer person, all these different identities that I'm trying to have this representation, have this visibility for, because it does matter and it makes a huge difference, whether
Yeah.
that's in front of a camera or behind, in terms of influencing the messaging or the structure or the design or whatever. And so it is about having that sense of self first, because it's easy to try and embrace somebody else's definition or somebody else's vision for what they want. But if that's not who we really are or what
Mhm.
is driving us, then we're not going to live a life of fulfillment or
Yes.
sustainability or happiness that we're all after. And I don't think that's fair to dim our output, to dim our light, to try and show up for somebody else in the way that we think they want us to. But that's not true to us.
Yeah. So, I have to ask, because you mentioned being queer. Was the coming out experience, do you think, harder, easier, different, the same as other queer youth because you'd already been through the fire with dwarfism, or do you think it's? And I asked this having a queer son, so
Right.
I'm and knowing from the moment they handed him to me in the hospital that I was like, this one's different than the first one. I don't know why, but there's something different. And by the time he was 3, I was like, I think I know. And by the time he was 5, I was like, yep, yep. So we just sort of waited for him to invite us in for the
Yeah,
last, 17 years, and he eventually did. We
totally.
never forced him to come out. It was just not our business. It's his life. But I'm sort of curious, and I've watched him, and it's almost like, because we always knew, and like frankly, I'd be more upset if he were a Republican than I mean, I'm like, awesome, great.
Right.
Like, I'm like, he's my best friend. He's amazing. Um,
Yeah.
but he almost got like, there was a certain point where he was like really like pissy and mean and angry with us. And
Mm,
a friend, another gay friend of mine said, I think it's because he doesn't have the struggle and he's wanting the struggle. He sees the struggle
hmm.
represented on television and you're not giving him the struggle. And it was almost like it was harder for him because we made it easy. And I'm sort of wondering if
Wow.
your coming out
Uh,
was different or not the same because you already had to go through so much fire and so much bullying
that's
and the
so
rest.
interesting. So, you know, being as transparent as possible, I've never come out because I don't identify with a label at this point in my life. So it's really hard to try and say to the world, I'm gay, I'm bi, without having like, or whatever it is. And so that's been, I think, a struggle in itself. Where I keep saying, like, trying to find this sense of identity, and my sense of self is changing so rapidly as I'm coming into this part of myself that I think has been there for so long, but
Yeah.
because I'm again living in a world that is constantly pushing back against being so different in the wrong way, that for a long time I don't think I wanted to acknowledge that,
Yeah.
because I didn't want to be even more out there, even more like further and separate from everyone else. And so it's been more recently, I would say in the last year and a half, that I'm not hiding anything, but at the same time, I'm not in your face saying this is who, like, what I identify with, or this is the label that I am, because I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's also hard, being out there in terms of having a platform and a public persona and people's expectations to constantly be sharing myself with them, but not trying to reveal something that isn't there. And like prematurely coming out is what I'm trying to get to. That's something that I don't want to do. And so I have always, since I've kind of reached the point of identifying as LGBTQ plus, knowing that I don't necessarily need to share that with anybody in terms of like what that label is or whatever I'm not comfortable with, but it's being able to also share my identity with the world, which
Yeah.
is huge. And it's like, it's freeing. It's so like transformative to be able to be acknowledged for who you truly are. And so I'm stepping into that more and more. And I'm also I'm a lot more comfortable with it now, because of that. And I'm really grateful for the ability to have a platform that I'm able to do that. But also, to your credit and to my mom's credit, having a household where I never needed to shy away from expressing my thoughts or expressing my feelings or who I really am. And that just being so fundamental to my development and I think who I am today.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, and I've gotten to know your mom on Clubhouse also, and she's delightful. It could go one of 2 ways, right? Part of you could be like, "Well, fine, you don't like me 3'9", well, screw you, I'm also queer." Ha, 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 right? You or it could be like, "You know what? I'm gonna hold back this one part of myself because everyone eats me for breakfast every single day,
Hmm.
that I wanna, like, I need
Yeah,
something that's just me, that's private, that's myself." And I can see the struggle of, if you're on stage talking about, acceptance and empathy and all these things, it's almost goes against your message to hold some of yourself back. And yet to just give yourself so much to everybody all the time. Like I can hide. I can go back and I can hide and I can, be in my cave and my, introvert isolation. But you don't have that luxury, and to then have this another othering thing on top of that, and to make that active choice, because it's one of those things, like, once it's out of the box, doesn't go back in.
correct.
Yeah.
And I'm also like very accepting of the fact that I don't necessarily need to label it.
Yes.
I just need to like follow my heart, follow my
Yes.
desires, and that will lead me to wherever it leads me, and that's where I'm at.
My favorite stories are the stories of people like Senator Harris Wofford, who died a few years ago, but who I knew back in my White House days, who
Mhm.
was married for like 60 years to the love of his life, this woman he met, like high school sweetheart, and then she passes away from cancer, and 5 years later he marries a man he met on a beach, love of his life, right, second love of his life. And it's like, I love those stories of people who just go through these seasons, and like we're
Yes,
all somewhere on a spectrum, right, and some of us are all the way on one on
absolutely.
some all the way on the other side, but we're all kind of in the middle, right? We're all sort of,
Right.
around, we're all floating around, and it grows and it changes as we change and our hormones change and the world
Totally.
changes. And I don't know. I mean, I think I love that you were eschewing labels and you're just Brandon, because that's awesome.
And at the end of the day, love is love, and we don't
Yes.
need to necessarily like box it into anything or put a gender on it or a label or any of those like things that we've been doing for the last forever.
Yes. Yes.
And so I am trying to really embrace that part of myself, and as I get more and more comfortable with it, um, sharing that with people
Yes.
because it really is powerful, and I'm discovering that every day.
Yeah, there's a whole other keynote in there about like, well, when about how much you share and who you are and putting
Yeah,
yourself out there and
for
understanding and
sure.
so last question, I could talk to you forever, but last question. I've noticed you always wear a necklace. What's on your I've never what is on your necklace?
So my necklaces are in rotation, so it's usually either this one
Or a
or
key. There's a
keys.
keys, right.
Yes. So this one is from a company called Kind Cult, and that's what it says. It says Kind Cult down here, and then it has like a number of they uniquely number all of the necklaces that they give out, and you're like part of the Kind Cult, and you embrace this message of acceptance and being a positive person without being like toxic positivity and like
Oh
all this
yeah.
stuff. And then the keys that I wear are from a company called the Giving Keys, and the two words that I have on them are elevate and empathy. So my mission, of course, and what the Giving Keys are all about is once you've embraced your word and it's like it's done its job for you, you pass that word on to somebody else so that they're able to use it, embrace it, and then it's a domino effect. So I am just like the biggest fan of the company in general, and it is a great symbolic message of this message of like empathy is the key to
Yes.
unlocking ourself and unlocking human connection. So kind of
Yes.
it symbolizes that.
I love that. That's fantastic. We'll put links to both of those companies in the show notes. I think that is, I've always seen those keys in your photos, and I'm like, what are those keys for? Like, I'm like he's too old to be carrying keys around to his house. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
it can't be that. But I didn't know if it was like a lingering thing from when you did have them. I was like trying to figure it out. So that's the
The
message
ultimate
behind them is
question.
so much better than I even would have ever dreamed. I love it. Tell the people who are listening and watching how they can find you.
Totally. So I hang out on Instagram the most. My username is at Farbstein, which is my last name, Farbstein. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn at my name, Brandon Farbstein. My book, 10 Feet Tall, is available on Amazon. You just search 10 Feet Tall and it will come right up. And then my website is brandonfarbstein.com if you'd like to get in touch or info for speaking.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you, LGO.